What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? My coworker likes to initiate conversations. Then does long pauses where you go to say something back. Then he cuts you off and keeps talking. He has entire conversations almost entirely by himself. He also likes to make changes to my paperwork before it's turned in. Ends up riddled with spelling mistakes while he tries to make the content look smarter. Fortunately, it's all electronically stamped with who made revisions. Worked with a girl who would sometimes just lay on the floor and play on her phone. She would routinely flip out about something her boyfriend did and just start screaming curse words. Sometimes in front of customers. She was eventually fired for smoking weed while on the clock. I had a manager once who dumped trash on my desk my third day there. She said it was to remind me that taking out the trash was part of my job description. It wasn't. Fast food. Third shift. The only other employee stayed in the bathroom doing blow. I have several bad ones, but the one that drives me the most crazy is a lady who creates problems just so she can solve them. Ugh. She takes a simple job, finds the one tiny issue, blows that up and freaks everyone out, and then solves it so she can be the hero. Just take the 1 minute to fix the issue in the first place. It would save the literal hours she spends working everyone up so she can be their savior. Not necessarily a coworker, but my old supervisor literally told me not to think, even if it's wrong, that I do things her way, and not to ask questions because I should already know what to do. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall. Gossip. Then call those people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for she did wrong. She was so arrogant. And she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. Example. She refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, etc. A real ray of sunshine she was. I worked somewhere in the last 3 years where they hired a secretary. WHO refused to use a computer. I couldn't believe it. In this day and age. My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and never got training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I go on about my day. I get called back a couple of days later by my managers and they circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and telling them what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker of mine had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I wasn't in on the deal. Walmart. And that bitch for almost getting me arrested. Hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding auto 30% tips his food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales. And the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day he came in and apologized. Said he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then next day he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. Me reading your comment. Underscore. Comma, I hired a cook. Oh, this is going to be about drugs. The HR manager at my last job had zero training, education or experience in HR. She was argumentative, passive aggressive and incompetent. Toward the end she asked me, why are you being resistant and you're not being a team player? When I was advocating for client safety, I was the second person in less than a year to leave and hire an attorney. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or two and we had no idea who was responsible. My co-workers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Chanel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She left for 3 weeks vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the Chanel Bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. Cedar-scented psycho. Alliteration with words that start with different letters. I love English. Edit. You don't realize how large Reddit actually is until a comment reached 2k plus upvotes in an hour. I have a co-worker who's very old-fashioned and strongly believes that males and females cannot be friends. Well, it just so happens that my manager and I, a male and a female, happen to get along quite well because of our similar ages and interests. She reported me to the other managers for it and accused me of sleeping with him. This guy named Daniel I used to work with at McDonald's in high school. He let everyone know he worked out and enjoyed being on the football team. He had this thing about taking 5s a day. He would walk by on his way back from the toilet, chest out, shoulders back, and triumphantly announce, "That's number 3. I'm Daniel." He creeped the out of all the girls at work, and then it came out he had stalking and assault charges pending outside work. Fired that day. I worked with a guy who couldn't learn new skills. When he started, he had to learn new programs and processes. Just like anyone would at almost any job. He couldn't pick up on it. Whether it was where to click on a software to get a certain result or how to fill out a report. Everyone on my team took turns showing him the ropes and it never sunk in. I remember being so frustrated because he could not figure out how to minimize a window. Top right corner. Click on the straight line. It took like 3-4 seconds for him to drag the mouse to the corner and then he'd hover around it but never on it. Super nice guy. But impossible to work and collaborate with on projects because so much time was wasted. I worked with someone in retail. He was my boss. And not a particularly bad guy. But he was a control freak who had to interject his opinion during every conversation anyone was having with a customer. This also went as far as him being in the middle of helping someone himself, stopping helping that customer to lean over to my till to help me with my transaction even though there was no indication I needed help and had worked there for over 5 years. This help would be in the form of him telling me what button to hit next on the till, to telling a customer they were wrong to have any given opinion on a topic, to telling customers that their choice of entertainment they were purchasing wasn't what they were after, even if they specifically came into the store for that specific item. He was also lousy as. Not a bad guy. But holy hell do I not miss working with him. I work with this guy that tries to convert people to his religion every day. It's super annoying. I worked with a really nice guy at my old job. Did him on FB. Multiple Bible study videos every day. He didn't say anything about religion at work. I had a cubicle mate that would sing along to Christian praise songs in a faint whisper while he listened through headphones. It sounded like Parseltongue. I worked with a guy who'd interrupt any conversation to talk about anything as if he was the expert. And I don't use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about anything, including things he had never heard of or obviously didn't know much about. When the subject being discussed was something in the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original discussion to something he would like to talk about at the moment. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% of him just talking non-stop. Everybody else was way too polite and against conflict to say anything, including me. So most people just tried to stay away from him. But he'd follow people around. I eventually left. But I even remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working at a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King. But without the lettuce because that's rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day. And was confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently if he ate corn he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He would tell me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time. Along with many other theories that came from his gut. One day we got into a political argument before the 2016 election where he said if Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war. And I will not hesitate to kill you and your family. Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. My old supervisor. She was that special brand of too nice. Laughing was her nervous tick and oh boy it was constant. She was incapable of being assertive, which is not the best quality for someone whose job is telling other people what to do. The best she could do was be passive aggressively nice when she really needed something done, which just made everyone dislike her. I'm pretty cool about people all have their role to play. But one time we had a secretary that would microwave eggs and canned tuna every morning in a bowl. Now, I am not a violent person. But the smell generated from microwaved eggs and canned tuna is downright repulsive by anyone's standards. A guy that was on the keto diet. It's all he'd ever talk about. He once overheard a conversation I was having with a colleague on a particularly stressful day. He interrupted us to suggest I give up carbs in order to reduce my stress levels. I worked with a guy that regularly googled everyone we worked with. He knew information about the apartment we had just sold and told everyone at our department meeting how much we sold for. One of my favorite things about being in the military was that your pre-military status did not matter. Everyone wears the same uniform and you'd never know if your favorite military leader came from privilege or squalor. The uniform, for all of its drawbacks, is an objectively effective unifier. It levels the playing field. Looking the same as everyone else challenged me to ensure that my work ethic and ideas created opportunities, not some predetermined status. I had a peer who was better than all of that. He didn't do the work unless it interested him, we didn't do interesting things, and constantly complained that our work was below him. More than one occasion, he tried to pay for others to do his work for him. His entire point of being in the military was to prove to his father that he could earn something, and sought to accomplish that by claiming he'd already earned it. That guy. Back when I worked at a restaurant I was friends with the bartender. Chill dude. Right up until they made him manager, and that small amount of power and increase in pressure made him so angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was at my job because I didn't do a thing that I've never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus so I couldn't get home. It was pitch black outside and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst co-worker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I wasn't a worker. He was just stressed and didn't know how to handle it, I suppose. This girl I work with is overly picky about stuff. Everything has to be her way or no way. She does everything louder to make it seem like she's working. But she's not actually getting anything done. She has been caught stealing from other servers several times. But we have no concrete proof. She accidentally takes people's tips. She's hellacious. I worked with a teacher that sat at his desk the entire year. Kids walked in and out whenever they wanted to. They did practically no work. He told racist jokes and was terrible with the students. One day I was sitting in the teacher workroom and another teacher noticed a phone on the counter. She asked if it was mine. When I said no, we looked at the lock screen to see whose it might be. The picture on the lock screen was of someone's bare tits. A few minutes later the bad co-worker walked in and picked it up. Needless to say, he was let go. He was a complete utter moron. He was incompetent in every way. But the icing on the cake was when he tried to put one of the pickup trucks into gear with the wiper stick and called me an idiot when I told him it was the wrong lever. Edit 1. Oh my god. I didn't expect this to garner so much attention. Close bracket. Edit 2. I see a lot of comments thinking it was a 3 on the tree manual. This truck was a Sy 98 Ram 1500. Automatic trans. Did you say wrong? Leave a crown Kaye. I worked at a grocery store and one of the scheduling ladies was a total C-bomb. When you work at a grocery store you expect to have shifts all over the place. That's part of the job, so I'm not complaining about that. Just about 2 years into working there I had an accident and broke my thumb hand. Not while at work unfortunately lol, and needed surgery. I went to apply for employment insurance, EI, and they required a record of employment, RO, so I asked the woman in charge of that, the aforementioned scheduling lady, if she would mind sending that off so I could still pay rent while I was off work recovering. BTW, she told me she already had. So I go back to the EI offices and they told me they still had no RO, so I go back to my old work and ask her a second time. This happens until I asked her to do it 4 times. This resulted in me having to borrow money from my parents for Christmas in order to pay my rent. My receptionist is the most useless person I've ever met. Ignores the phones while playing on her own personal device. Takes countless personal calls too. Also does all the personal business on their work computer from shopping to bills. On any given day will constantly find ways to avoid doing work by getting up and shooting the with anyone patient enough to listen. My personal favorite. Does not take an ounce of criticism whatsoever. Every question or suggestion is an attack or bullying in their opinion. Person has filed countless HR complaints because other employees have suggested this person focus on their work. Countless meeting and time has been wasted trying to appease this person. Their last day is coming in a few weeks and I'm going to celebrate. From the bottom of my heart and every fiber of being. I'm Jamie. Her picture belonged next to passive aggressive in the dictionary. She knew how to stay on the good side of the boss, but treated most everyone else like dirt. She would intentionally ignore your attempts to communicate with her regarding important work matters. Then turn around and claim you are the one being difficult. Whenever you pointed out one of her mistakes, however small, she would throw a temper tantrum like a little kid. Haven't worked with her for many years now. And I sincerely hope I can eventually forget what she looks like. I walked in on her spitting in my coffee. 3-person apartment. Myself. An awesome dude and this terrible new coworker. She was fresh out of college and believed that she was smarter than myself and our other team member because of that. She totally discounted anyone's opinions except her own and one manager that let her do whatever she wanted. She was the worst one-upper than I'd ever met. Even for stupid things. Like going to a coffee stand. She'd chime in and say how her friends work at a coffee stand and they know her order by heart. Just stupid stuff. She thought she was adorable and charming but was incredibly grating and worthless. She constantly messed up on her job, but if you tried to help or give any constructive feedback, she'd cry and go to her wet nurse, aka the one manager that liked her. She lasted almost 4 years. Which blew my mind. She was furloughed at the beginning of Corona, but will not be returning as her position is being taken by the owner's daughter. The company split about 2 years ago. I went to the new company and she and awesome dude stayed at the old one. Had a supervisor that loved to chew ass and harass. You could make the most minor mistake and she would tell it you. And if you asked to do something or have her show you how to do a task, her excuse was go ask this person. They're better at it. Or I'm kinda busy, followed by jumping on her social media. I worked in a place similar to IMCA. They hired a tramp gym coach who was great at those things. But somewhere along the line she also picked up reception shifts. She was also dyslexic. This meant I would get emails I couldn't read with phone messages for obviously wrong names and phone numbers without enough digits, or when I called them turned out to be wrong numbers. The workplace was too scared to move her off reception in case it was discrimination. There was plenty of other work to be done. She didn't need to be fired or anything. So instead of taking a job that wasn't meant to be her job off her, the rest of us had to cop abuse from upset clients because we weren't going to blame her mild disability for us not calling them back. The boss who used to grab my ass. She knew I was married and not interested, but kept doing it. I finally went to HR. But it was a small company and they were close friends. My workload then grew. And she got more aggressive. She told me that no one would believe a man was the victim. And everything I looked into said I didn't have a lot of hope. I ended up quitting the job and not finding anything new for 6 months. It was expensive. I told my parents that I got fired because that was strangely less humiliating than admitting I was a victim. This was a tough one because when you work in retail long enough, you will hate a lot of people. My first job in high school had this gremlin who thought she was the because she was a varsity cheerleader. She had the worst temper I have ever seen. It was like anger was the only emotion she could feel. She appeared to only be capable of communicating through yelling, insulting and berating everyone. Every shift with her was just watching her go through an 8-hour-long tantrum. I wouldn't be surprised if she was still a little gremlin. This girl identified herself as a mermaid. Every time I would get mad at her she would call me racist towards mermaids. She was completely serious about this. P.S. I have nothing against aquatic humanoids. This one in particular was a ding dong. I can't decide which one to pick. Oddly enough we all worked in the same quad cube. And their crowning highlight moments both surfaced on the same day. The 11th of September. One of them spent the whole day stomping around the office bitching about how she had plans to watch the ball game that night. And now her night was ruined because the game was cancelled. And for Christ's sakes. It's not like the planes flew into the stadium. It's just some buildings miles away. The other had some sort of video capture software on his computer and kept replaying the clips of people jumping from the burning buildings, cheering and giggling as if he were watching circus clowns. Dude. Look. There's another one. Wooer. He bounced off the side. Man. That had to hurt. Hey. Watch this. Then he'd roll the video backwards and forwards, making a slide whistle noise as the people repeatedly went back and forth. Had a co-worker who always gossiped about others and would say horrible things about everyone in the office. It created a super toxic culture and caused many people to leave. Not because they didn't like the work. They just hated the culture. My current co-worker. He loves to watch my work, track my tickets, wants in on all my meetings, not to be helpful but to insert himself into everything I do. If I don't jump on something in 1 minute he will ask if I missed the email or the ticket or the request. Then he plays 20 questions with me like I report to him or something. The worst part is he isn't mean about it. So I can't say something to him because he just says we are a team and work together, so he is helping. I think he is just passive aggressive and just really good at it. Over time it just is on my last nerve. Do you want every instruction delivered to you verbally, while you're distracted and least expect it? Do you want every directive to be presented as a fire you need to put out immediately, only to be ended with you don't have to do it right this second when you've dropped what you're doing and you're halfway through the request that was urgent enough that your boss came to you to tell you instead of writing an email? Do you want to be interrupted 5 minutes after the last interruption, consistently for years on end, effectively training you not to try to work because you're just going to be thrown off track right when you get into it? Try working for my dad TM. Alcoholism subsidized by paying you more than you're worth. I worked in a restaurant with a guy who claimed to have PTSD from tripping too hard on LSD. It was a busy place, around 400 to 500 plates a night with only 5 chefs. Every time his station got more than like 10 simultaneous tickets he would run out the back, leaving me and the guy on the other side of him to do his job. Also his PTSD was never medically confirmed, and we believed he just made it up. At my first ever job, I worked with a middle-aged guy who lived in his car, picked at his face constantly, and would always ask me and the other teenage employees if we needed a ride home from work. He gave off the creepiest vibe and was eventually fired. Oh gosh, I have several. But to pick one, I guess one of the worst was the one who every time they walked up behind me they'd grab my shoulder and squeeze my shoulder every time they walked past me, even if they weren't trying to get my attention. Which I think the most appropriate way to get someone's attention is to call out their name or to tap them on the shoulder instead of grabbing and squeezing their arm. And I've had a traumatic childhood, so I especially never took this behavior well. I ended up reporting it to my supervisor though.